Good afternoon and welcome to this hybrid meeting of Social Services, Housing and Community Safety Scrutiny Committee on the 13th of July 2023. I am Councillor Charlotte Goldsworthy and I will be chairing this meeting. Before we move on to the next agenda item, please note that this meeting will be recorded. Please can you ensure that your phones are switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Can members and officers who are present in the chamber please use their microphones when speaking. When asked to raise your hand, can members who are virtually viewing this meeting raise your electronic hand, and members who are in the chamber, please raise your hand. For the purposes of declarations, I would like to confirm that we will be scrutinising items 7, 8, 9 and 10. Now I will move on to agenda item 2. Are there any declarations of interest?
I can't see any, Chair.
Okay. Agenda item 3, you will see the meetings attached at pages 5 to 14 of your agenda pack. If you feel these minutes are accurate record of the meeting, can I please have a proposer and a seconder? Members who do not indicate to the contrary, then I will take it that these minutes are approved. I'll approve. I'll propose, yeah. You can't be here. Wasn't here last meeting.
Yeah, I can't second. I wasn't here.
Right.
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you. Agenda item 4. We'll now move on to Cabinet's agenda for pre-decision scrutiny. As previously mentioned, we have decided to scrutinise items 7, 8, 9 and 10. We'll go straight into item 7, and as in briefing, everyone's been informed that we're having a bit of a presentation from Angela Thomas. Is there anything, Andrew, you'd like to say first?
That's okay, Chair. If I can have your indulgence, just to introduce the 3 items, next items, all in one go. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, committee, these are really important items that we've got for you here today. You'll have seen over the last number of sessions that we've done that we've started to lay out some of the real pressures that we've got across all of the 3 areas within my directorate. So adult social care, children's social care and housing and homelessness. You'll have seen those coming in lots of different variations, and we put our heads together and we felt that actually we can't continue in the future to do what we've always done because the pressures are just building and building. And so we've got to start to think about how do we do things differently. So the way that you start with that is you put together a strategy, and the strategies that you'll see in paper today are high-level strategies. So you might be thinking, well, where are the actions from these strategies? They're high-level direction of travel strategies. However, what I've asked the officers to do today as heads of service is to outline not just the strategies today, so they'll take it as read that you've read those strategies, but actually go into a bit more detail about where the pressures are so that you understand those, but also then some of the things that we're thinking about as we go into the coming years, so in years 2, 3 and 4. So some of the investments we might need to make in those years to actually help us to manage some of the pressures that we're seeing across social care and housing. Importantly, we're not asking you for decisions today, so these are just our thoughts, and any of the suggestions that
Andrew,
are made.
if I can just come in there, the 3 of them are for decisions.
Yeah. So decisions for consultation. Yeah, on the papers. So but the presentations are different. So we're not just gonna present to you a presentation just going through the strategies. I've asked the heads of service to go into more detail so that committee has more detail than that today. So some of the suggestions that we'll make within those presentations, as I said, they're not going to be asked. I'm not asking you for a decision around that. We will need to come back to you once we've fully costed some of this stuff with individual papers for you to agree or not to agree going forward. What we wanted to show you is in the round the situation for the directorate going forward over the medium-term financial plan, but some of the ideas that we've got around how we manage some of those pressures. So as I say, Chair, I think these are important presentations which go much further than the actual written strategies that you'll see. And I'm happy then to hand over to Angela to begin her presentation.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. So just to reiterate what the Director said, the draft plan in front of you today is a high set of principles that we wish to consult upon in the next 60 days. But the presentation that I will make to you now will highlight both why and how we will need to do things differently moving forward. So I'll go straight into the strategy. If I start with the first slide, Tash. So I give you something about the national picture. So nationally, the number of people aged 65 plus are set to rise to a quarter of the population by 2050. Dementia is expected to double within 20 years. And for older people services locally, we have 30,000 people aged 65 plus, 900 people in residential care, 700 people receiving care in their own homes, 80 people on a brokerage list. Now, what that means, there are 80 people who've been assessed as requiring a package of care, and they are hanging on by a thread in the communities with family and friends because we're unable to source that care. And sadly, what happens with some of those people when families break down is we end up putting people into extended care, which is a residential care placement. And I can tell you today that since September of 22 to date, we've put 60 people into extended care placements because we've been unable to get a package of care. And sadly, these people do not come out the other end. And then I put there 20,000 unpaid carers. These are families and friends who care for people, individuals, loved ones. We don't even think we're scratching the surface here. We think it's a lot higher, and I'll come on to that bit later on. So if we move to the next slide, so some of the challenges that we're facing, our availability of residential nursing beds is virtually at a maximum. We're running out of beds. We have no specialist dementia care provision, and I've just told you that it's likely to double in the next 20 years. We have no residential reablement provision. So what that means is we've got a disproportionate number of people in Neath Talbot entering the care system because we're unable to get them back on their feet and back home. So our neighbours in Swansea have something called a step up, step down, which is something we want to develop in Neath Talbot, where people have a period of time where they're helped back onto their feet, some OT, occupational therapy, which helps them to get stronger and get home. With us in Neath Talbot, it's straight into residential care, which is not the right way to do things. I mentioned top-up fees there. So what this is residential care homes and providers saying that Neath Talbot is not paying me enough money to run my business anymore. So we currently contract about £792 per week. They're saying that's not sufficient, and they're therefore charging a top-up fee to the family of anything between £20 and £120 a week. Now, many families are coming to us and saying, we can't afford that. And we're now having to say, well, neither can we. So they have to wait wherever they are in the system to find a home that they can afford to pay for. But that is a sort of silent figure that if the local authority were picking up, we'd be paying way near £1,000 a bed per week, and we can't afford that. We've been struggling since COVID to recruit care workers across the whole of the sector. That's in the domiciliary care world and residential care. And we have an ageing workforce, predominantly female workers, usually word of mouth. But again, it's an ageing population, and we're looking at how we can do things differently in the future. I put reduction in hospital beds. I can tell you only this week we've had 2 wards in Singleton close, 1 ward in Morriston, and another further 94 beds that are due to close by March 2024. And all of this is silting up and causing us the headache that is in adult community care. Morriston Hospital again was under business continuity. Ambulances couldn't get in and people weren't coming out the other end. But that is becoming a regular occurrence. That is a daily life of adult services. So if we move on to the next slide, these are the challenges we have for people living with PAN disability services. So these are people with a physical, sorry Tash, next slide. These are people living with a physical learning disability and or a mental health condition. So again, local data, we have 540 people with a learning disability and living in residential and supported living arrangements, 400 people in receipt of a direct payment. We have an increased number of people with a learning disability living with dementia. And this is particularly around Down syndrome. So years gone by, people would have lived into their 30s. People are living well into their 60s and 70s now. But our residential care provision isn't adapted already to deal with these individuals, and they're saying they require more money, more training, more staff to do so. We have 220 people attending day services at any one time, and 75 children currently known to the childcare disability team who will be turning 18 in 2 to 3 years' time. Not all of them will require adult services, but a fair proportion will. And then I put this as the last slide, and I'm sure Kerry and will speak to these things later, but we have at the moment 20 children in high-cost residential placements. These are the 15 of whom will turn 18 in the next 2 to 3 years. These will be children with the most challenging behaviours. They will be the school exclusions. And just to put in perspective, just 3 of these children currently are costing £15,000 a week. That's £780,000 a year. So it's in all our interest to be sure that we're getting this bit right before it reaches adulthood. Because once you're in adulthood, those costs can't continue into your 70s. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Next slide. So these are some of the emerging themes that we're seeing. So in addition to what I've spoken about with older people services and people with complex disabilities, we're now seeing a new cohort of people coming through the system. I don't know whether this is post-COVID, but we're seeing people with literacy, reading and writing skills, can't pay bills, the poverty cost of living. We're seeing people in debt. We know about substance and alcohol use. We're having an awful lot of people presenting now with mental health issues in the community, hoarding, I won't go through it all, but school exclusions. And our early intervention, or prevention and intervention services, are seeing more and more of these people with really complex disabilities. And again, all they can do is slow down the process, but they won't prevent them at some point reaching adult services and statutory services. So that is a worrying emerging theme that wasn't there for us probably 5 years ago, but is absolutely what we're living with now. So next slide, please. So in terms of older people services, then, these are some of the things we think we have to do differently. We need to take back our control of the market. We need to bring services back in-house. And I mean residential, domiciliary, etc., etc. We need to develop that residential reablement provision so that we can have people stepping back and getting back at home rather than having to go into residential care. We need that specialist dementia provision. We need it both in residential settings and in the community. And we're looking to enhance our extra care offer. So some of you will be aware we currently have 2 extra care schemes in Teetoyntaig and Ysbryd y Mor. They're run by the Coastal Group. We've been working very closely and piloting for the last 8 months a number of beds in both of these facilities. But as with austerity and budget cuts over the last number of years, we closed all the communal areas. So there's no kitchens, there's no hairdressers, there's nowhere for people to eat. We want to enhance that model and put it back, because what we're finding is, and care providers are telling us this quite clearly, it's far easier to provide care under one roof. So if we could source care under one roof rather than travelling the length and breadth of the county borough, it's an alternative model for social workers to be offering to families when they can no longer have care in their own home. And as I said to you earlier, there's 60 people that we put into extended care, residential care, who haven't come back out. This would be a far better offer to individuals and families if we could enhance this offer. We're looking at alternative models of domiciliary care. I talked to you about an ageing workforce and mostly female. Well, why aren't we attracting a younger workforce in? So we're looking to put a tier of like a career pathway, bringing people into the system with an offer in 2 years' time that you could train to become a social worker. So we're looking at different ways we can attract people into the market. I talked about the support for unpaid carers. Literally, we have to do everything we can. It's just imperative. If this group of people, and with 20,000 plus, said that they couldn't care anymore, the whole of adult services would collapse. We are literally hanging on by family and friends looking after loved ones in the community. We're preparing for market failure, and I know chair of this committee is we've already had a workshop on, we didn't call it this, but social enterprise model. We are well aware that there are a number of providers currently who are tinkering on the edge. Either they can't provide the standard of care or financially they're struggling. So we are preparing for what that might look like for Neath Talbot. And yeah, there are meetings regularly now about this very, very agenda. And these things we're considering, could we make use of any council-owned buildings that are now closing due to hybrid working? If there are empty buildings out there, we certainly need all those facilities I'm talking about to you today. And again, we really need to get back some council-owned residential care provision. And I know that's controversial, and I know the past decisions were taken with different administrations, but we really feel we do need to take control of that ourselves in Neath Talbot. Next slide, please, Tash. So again, for disability services, we want to expand what's called a core and cluster model of care. Basically, it's sharing care in a street or in a community, very much like the extra care model, which doesn't allow people to have to travel for miles and miles between calls. We want to have our own specialist domiciliary care in-house. I gave an example last week, I'll give it again. One young gentleman, aged 22, who requires turning during the night, £150,000 a year. That would buy us a whole night service for the whole of the local authority. But that's what it's costing for one individual. We want to expand our respite care services. If we opened another Tremor, we would fill it within a week. That is the demand we've got for respite care services, and families are crying out for it. We're looking at our independent living skills. As we transition people to adulthood, we converted 2 flats in our bespoke service just for that specifically. And again, just to say what I said, for older people services, are there any council-owned buildings that are empty? And is there anything that we can bring back to use for people with a disability? And finally then, just to put things into perspective financially. So next slide, Tash, please. This is the occupancy of care homes. Now, it's skewed slightly in fact that we've got one 90-bedded care home that has been unable to take care home admissions for some time because it's been under what we call escalating concerns, and we wouldn't allow. So actually, occupancy levels are way up into the 95%, which is a complete turnaround to where we probably were pre-COVID or during COVID. So you can see there in 2001, we dipped, and that's when Welsh Government came in and helped the homes financially. We're back up now to the 90+%. Next slide, please. I spoke about the in-house domiciliary care service, so you can see both the linear lines are going downwards, but what's interesting about this slide is the number of clients has remained the same. So what we feel has happened here is that our pilot of outcome-focused commissioning that we've done across the county borough is paying dividends. But the bit I wanted to highlight there is 10 years ago in Neath Talbot, that orange figure would have been blue and vice versa. So the in-house service would have been the orange and the blue would have been external. And that's been completely reversed in the last 10 years. And final slide, please, just to give you some idea when I'm talking about costs. For older people, aged 65 plus, going into a residential care home, average about £41,000. Average time you spend in a care home is 18 months maximum. So older people are not costing us lots of money, even though they're living longer and growing older. Look at the cost on disability services. So this is one adult going into a family placement for a year, just under £24,000. And I've been very conservative here. If that individual lives for 30 years, and I could have easily made that 50, 30 years is 718 in a supporting living environment, 2.8 million. And in a residential environment, £4.2 million. So that they are just an example of one individual moving in for 30 years. And like I say, I could have easily made this 50 years. And you saw the numbers earlier about the people we're dealing with. So the costs are astronomical. We have to do something differently. But one plea to the committee, I know you're not making decisions today, but when I present adult services, I present the whole of adult services. When we have to go forward with costed business plans and we come to you for decisions in September onwards, there is little point or no point in saying, yes, we'll support a residential care placement, but we'll ignore the learning disability side of things. It comes as one whole package. It isn't in silos. So when I come forward, I'd be expecting approval of the whole system, not just little bits. And I'll stop there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ange. Right, so we'll go to questions now, yeah. Maybe there's some questions basically have been answered now, but do we go, Helen?
Yeah, I am welcoming so much of this. It's really good, and I think the way people want things to be delivered. But the bit about the, promoting the social networks and self-management and all this kind of thing, the problem we have in Neath Talbot is transport, getting people to these, we can put on the greatest things on earth, but if people can't get to them, we can't achieve what we want to achieve. So are you looking at sort of, what's it called, community transport as part of this as well?
Yeah, I probably should have said thank you for that, Councillor. None of this is doable unless this is a council-wide approach. So when I talk about the preventative agenda, there's no point me saying that Sarah Waite and her team will just stop a little bit in the community. This requires support from across the whole of the council. Refuse collectors, everybody is seeing somebody in the community every day, and it has to be much, much larger than just adult services. What I will say to the committee is, whichever way you dress this up and whichever directorate you're in, most people are heading towards adult services. This is the stop. This is where you end up. So this has to be a council-wide approach. And I take your point, transport's been raised for years and years, and it has to be addressed, yes, we are looking at it, but it does need to be broader than just this directorate.
You want to ask 1%?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the other thing I noticed in the paper was about sensory adaptations. I didn't know that we did that. Although it's really, really welcome, I think in order to reach people, we need to educate GPs and that as well, that we offer that service. For instance, I've got a friend who recently gone deaf. I didn't realise that these services were available, and clearly neither does her doctor. So have you got plans to sort of work closer with healthcare for things like that?
We've always worked closely with healthcare, but I can tell you it's not a huge provision, but I'll ask Sue to tell you exactly what provision we have in the local authority. Sue Bradshaw.
Hi, thank you, Angela. We have a small team. It's attached to our community occupational therapy team. So there are 3 workers who work in the sensory team. That obviously covers not just hearing impairments, but visual impairments as well. But they've been there a long time, actually. They're a really experienced team. The workers have been there many years, and they do work closely with health, as Angela said. So, yeah, we can certainly try and improve that. And there is a Welsh Government initiative as well at the moment that I take part in, which is working alongside our colleagues in the Health Board to try and improve sensory impairment services.
The only one question I've got, but obviously it's obviously an ongoing thing. So obviously you're going to bring in another paper back to us. And I think all committee totally support this document going forward, and quite excited about it. How are you going to then sort of look at measuring and reporting back to us going forward? Because obviously you've got lots of headings in the paper as well, whether it's domiciliary care and that. Like when you measure it, at how we're obviously doing going forward with the different changes and that. Have you had?
Okay.
Or do you want to...
Yeah, well, we're at early stages. So I say early, we've developed business cases for everything, costed business cases for every scheme that we're putting forward. So some of that will be a call from reserves corporately, but some of it will be something that we'll absorb and we'll take on individually. The proof will be in the pudding, isn't it? How many older people will live longer? They are living longer, but how many can we delay coming into statutory services? So that's getting your preventative agenda right. And I know Sarah's doing a whole chunk of performance indicators on that world to be able to prove that that's how we need it to work. Would we look at, we've seen, for example, the performance that we've done in terms of outcome focused commissioning for older people services around domiciliary care. Like I said, the hours have gone down, but the number of clients that we're serving are the same. So you could argue you're sharing the care thinly, but we're not, because we're not getting any safeguarding issues. What we're having is the right amount of care for that individual. So I think there's a whole plethora of information, Chair, that we can pull together. If we look back, we know people don't choose to go into residential care homes. We're not Dorset, we're not awash with money, we've not got £5,000 a week to spend on the Ritz. People don't ask to go in. It's a last resort. So we want to provide more community services where possible that prevents, and it then becomes the last resort when you have to go into residential care. So I think that's where we're coming from. We've struggled during this bit of before we start consulting. We have spoken in a language that says we will support you to live in your own communities. Now that's been a shift away from your own home, which is the way we would have always spoken before, because we cannot guarantee at this point in time we can find care in every individual home. That's what we aspire to. So if we can't do that, what's our alternatives? And that's when I talk about older persons villages. I didn't mention that one actually. Older persons villages, something, and Shalay can bring that in later. It's care under one roof, but a care that offers something different to what we've got currently. So, something that's all singing and dancing, where there are communal areas and, restaurants, hairdressers, whatever that needs to be. So we'll measure this as we go along, Chair. I'm happy to work with committee as you see fit.
Okay, good. And the other question I've got is, when it obviously mentions like community hubs and that, what's the the timeline for this? If we've got one, sort of, do you envisage a certain timeline? It's like, obviously we've got some empty buildings closed now, and what my concern is that they're going to go, lay there dormant for a period of time and just go dilapidated, which obviously comes with their own problems then when we go to look at using them again.
Yeah, so we have raised this. It has been raised with cabinet, corporate directors. Everybody's aware of what the ask is. I take your point on building. One thing that we are clear about is that there does happen to be quite a bit of capital money around at the moment. So we need to take this opportunity whilst we can. There's regional capital monies, and I believe there's capital monies within the council. So we need to move quickly on this. I think we were told yesterday timescales are that corporate directors will work through this during the summer, and then late August, early September, decisions will start to get taken. And for me, there are some things that are imminent that have to happen in year. And then there are some things, like when you talk about Older Persons Village and Getley Gron, there might be a 2 to 3 year discussion, because it's got, you're not going to have an overnight discussion with people leaving their own homes. That needs to be planned. That's a big decision for anyone to take. So yeah.
Thanks, George. Yeah, thanks. That's all we got for that one. So we'll go straight on to item 8. No, bear with me.
Thank you. I'll just share.
Just bear with me a minute, because I've missed out something. Got so engrossed in with that conversation that. Yeah, the recommendations listed on page 14 of the Cabinet Board Agenda Pack. I will propose, and can I have a seconder, please?
I'll second.
Can members please indicate if they wish to abstain?
I can see no abstentions, Chair.
Yeah. Members, if you do not indicate to the contrary, then I will take it that this decision is supported to Cabinet. So we'll go now straight into item 8, and this report is for decision also.
Thank you very much. So recently, we've seen a very big increase in the number of people presenting as homeless to the council, and also a notable reduction in people's abilities to quickly access the affordable housing they need. There's an obvious link here between people contacting housing options because they're at risk of becoming homeless and the difficulties people are facing when trying to access affordable housing. And that means that we need to look at both issues, and both issues need to be tackled together if we're going to put in place a lasting and meaningful solution to support our communities. So that's the reason why we've developed a 3-year housing and homelessness strategic plan. So I know many of you today have been contacted by your local residents from your ward asking for help with their housing situation, and that many of you have also seen firsthand not only the increasing numbers of people needing help in this regard, but also how hard it is for those people to get the housing they need. This slide here sets out some of the key things that have led to this current situation. Because of time today, I'm not going to talk through all these bullet points, but there is much more information in the strategic document I have provided today. I'm just going to pull out here a couple of the key things that I really want to draw your attention to. But one thing to note on this is that these issues here aren't happening in isolation to each other. The different challenges actually have an interface between each other, which is then creating a much more profound impact on our communities. So the first point I want to make on this slide is that the amount of funding made available by Welsh Government to support those facing or experiencing homelessness is simply not sufficient to meet our current demand or our projected demand. And this then is having a really big impact on the Council's finances. So I want to circle back to this point a little bit further in my presentation. One of the biggest things we've seen this year is a massive loss of private rental sector properties in Neath, Talbot. We've lost around 50 landlords. Now that's landlords, not properties, that we know of since the Renting Home Act came into force last December. Alongside having less private rental properties available, rent levels in this sector are now unaffordable for many people on low incomes. I recently read a really startling report by the Bevan Foundation, which highlighted that in February 2023, of the 51 properties advertised for rent in Neath, Talbot, none of those properties were actually at the local housing allowance rate. The report showed that the average monthly difference for a one-bedroom property was £96, and the difference for a three-bedded property was £146. One of the main concerns that members often raise to me is the length of time people are having to wait for social housing. A reduction in private rental accommodation at affordable rates inevitably means that we have an incredible amount of people stuck on social housing waiting lists. Recently, one RSL told me that they were actually now receiving over 100 new applications each week. What makes this even harder for people is that at any one point in time, we've got around 200 people that are homeless in emergency temporary accommodation. And of course, they've got a very urgent need to be rehoused, which means when some social housing becomes available, those people are likely to have a higher prioritisation for that accommodation. What we're also seeing is that there's a very different cohort of people that are now experiencing homelessness. We're seeing the types of households that we rarely worked with only a few years ago. At one point this year, we had 30 families with children living in bed and breakfasts. And I find that really, really hard to accept. And I just want us to kind of think about that for a moment. Think about being a child or think about being a parent. That child doesn't have, that child is sharing a space with its family. It doesn't have room to play. It doesn't really have sufficient room to be able to do homework. And there's no cooking facilities there for the parents to do nutritious dinners for them. And that's really hard to accept. And that's something that I think we really got to focus on tackling here. What we're also seeing is that there's increasing numbers of people presenting to housing options with multiple and co-occurring needs, where lack of housing is just one of many issues that they're needing to deal with. That can then make it a lot harder for them to be able to find secure accommodation. But also, more importantly, it makes it very hard for them to sustain that tenancy as well, which then puts them at risk of these repeat episodes of homelessness. So I'd just like you to keep those things in mind when I show you the next two slides here. So this slide and the next slide, I'm going to show how it's impacting on our communities as well as the council's finance. This slide that I've put up now shows you that the demand for temporary accommodation is projected to grow without us implementing a programme of significant transformation. We've seen a 108% increase in households accessing temporary accommodation since 2019. Back in 2019, we'd have around 40 families at any one point in time requiring temporary accommodation. Now we have around 200 people at any one point in time accessing temporary accommodation. This increased demand is resulting in us needing to use bed and breakfast as emergency accommodation for those that become homeless, because we just don't have enough council operated temporary accommodation units available. Bed and breakfast really should be a last resort for us, but demand is so high right now that it's become part of our normal response, and that is just not an acceptable or sustainable position, and we've got to reverse that. What I'm showing you in this slide is that the numbers of people becoming homeless and requiring temporary accommodation are just going to continue to rise and rise and rise and rise if we don't take action right now to start to prevent homelessness from occurring. By the 2027-28 financial year, we're going to see a 244% increase in households requiring temporary accommodation. That means that there's going to be 2,233 households over that financial year coming to us needing temporary accommodation if we don't do anything. As well as the obvious human cost of rising numbers of people becoming homeless, this also is having a massive financial impact on the council. In the 22-23 financial year, the council spent £2.87 million on bed and breakfasts. That figure isn't including the cost of the council operated temporary accommodation, it's not including the cost of all the preventative work we do, and it's not including the costs of the housing options team either. At present, the grants provided to us by Welsh Government to support the council in discharging its statutory homeless duties is just not aligned to the actual costs we're incurring. There was a projected overspend of 1.4 million last year, and that was purely driven as a result of that demand for temporary accommodation. Luckily, Welsh Government did provide us with a grant towards the end of that financial year, and that reduced the overspend, but that overspend last year was still over £500,000. If demand continues to rise in line with the projections I've shown you, the council is going to see an annual overspend of over £2.5 million by the 2027-28 financial year. Alongside those pressures on homelessness services, we've also got a number of challenges in terms of strategic housing. Again, I'm not going to go through all these points today because that could just be a presentation in itself, and you will find a lot more information in the strategic plan. I'm just going to pick out here a few key things I want to talk about with you. The first thing to mention is that there has been a historic lack of strategic resource within the council. That's not unique to Neath Talbot. But what that has resulted in is a reduced, kind of reduced strategic planning and not as enhanced joined up partnership approaches as we might like. It also means that sometimes we've not been able to maximise the impact of funding and investment opportunities that we might have available to us. One of the key challenges that we have when it comes to developing housing stock is the lack of suitable land, which alongside some of the low land values in Neath Talbot means that certain areas in Neath Talbot are less attractive to developers. So what happens then? That leads to overdevelopment in certain ward areas, which then places pressure on existing communities and infrastructure, and understandably then leads to local objections when new developments are proposed in those areas. Alongside social housing, we also do need to make sure that we've got enough housing to attract those that work in Neath Talbot to live in Neath Talbot. We know there's a lot of exciting proposals coming online, which will increase the number of jobs to our local communities. But we need to be able to maximise our local economies by making sure we have sufficient housing so people live in Neath Talbot and then spend their money in Neath Talbot. The next slide I'm going to show you is why it's really important for us to start to take a more strategic approach to housing development in Neath Talbot. So the first graph here, that is showing that there's a significant need for a significant programme of development in order to ensure that we have enough affordable housing for our communities. In the first 5 years of the local housing market assessment period, there's a need to develop 412 affordable homes per annum, of which 92% should be for social housing. The local housing market assessment also highlights that 68% of that affordable housing needs to be one-bedded properties, which we recognise can actually be very problematic for local areas if it's not well thought out, not well designed, not well planned, and not well supported. One of the ways that we help to stimulate the development of affordable housing is through something called the Social Housing Grant, which we manage on behalf of Welsh Government. The council was able to allocate all the grant that was made available to Neath Talbot last year. Unfortunately, though, some RSLs weren't able to claim that money within the required timescales. As can be seen on this pie chart over here, only 64% of the available grant was actually used in Neath Talbot last year. The remaining money, which was over £4.67 million, needed to be returned to Welsh Government, which is really disappointing when we're talking about our need for affordable housing. RSLs were unable to claim this money due to things like objections at planning committees needing to redesign their plans following pre-planning advice, and also delays in land acquisition. So some of those things, though, could have potentially been minimised or mitigated if we got better strategic planning resources in place to support those RSLs. In this slide here, and also in the next slide, I'm going to be pulling out some of the key priority actions that our department needs to undertake in order to prevent our projections that I've shown you earlier from actually turning into a reality. The first set of priorities relates to homelessness. So what we have to do is we need to really take forward a very ambitious programme of activity as part of our rapid rehousing plan to completely transform the way we support households facing or experiencing homelessness. It's going to be all about getting people quickly into a settled home rather than people needing to access that temporary accommodation. However, those plans will take time to realise and embed. So we do recognise that alongside that ambition, we are going to need to actually put in place some short-term alternatives to reduce bed and breakfast use. So we will need to develop some more temporary accommodation that the council operates. As part of that work, though, we're going to be starting to establish new models of short-term accommodation for homeless people with more complex or multiple needs. And in those models, their longer-term holistic accommodation and support needs will then be assessed and better supported. To prevent people with complex needs being caught up in these cycles of homelessness that I mentioned, we're going to develop and implement something called a housing first model. Those that are referred into this service will be provided with housing and ongoing intensive person-centred support to ensure that they're able to maintain those tenancies long term. Alongside helping people to secure tenancies, we're also going to be establishing a tenancy sustainment panel with RSLs. So that will then help to ensure that residents that might start to show signs of struggling with their tenancy receive early interventions to prevent escalation and to stop them from losing their home. To take forward this work, though, it is going to require a restructure to build upon the housing options team to ensure that the workforce is best placed to deliver our new ways of working. Although a restructure is going to require financial investment from the council, this is a spend to avoid proposal. The intention here is that this investment will then result in reducing the numbers of people becoming homeless and prevent the need for bed and breakfasts, which are costly and just do not provide the right outcomes for people. Our financial modelling indicates that funding will need to be our financial modelling indicates that the funding needed to invest into the workforce is going to actually cost the council less than if we do nothing new to prevent people from becoming homeless and we just continue to use bed and breakfast and those projections that I showed become a reality. With regards to strategic housing, we're going to need to focus on the development and implementation of particular specific strategies to develop more tailored solutions for some of our most prominent areas of need, including young care leavers, older people and homeless families. Alongside that, we're going to also need to look at how we can better stimulate more development and investment into Neath Talbot through the better use of grants and other funding sources. This more strategic approach is going to enable better facilitation and market management of developers to encourage creation of more affordable houses that, most importantly, are in the right places. Working with our wider council colleagues, we're also looking at how we can redevelop council-owned land to meet local housing needs. So, as Angela mentioned in her previous presentation there, we are in the process of scoping out some options for repurposing unused council land to develop an older person's village. And also, by building on our previous success earlier this year, we want to look at increasing the number of owned and managed by the council so we can offer housing to those that experience particular barriers to accessing affordable accommodation. We're also looking at how we might be able to develop the housing we need more quickly through more innovative development models, such as modular housing, which can be built much quicker than using traditional construction methods. Changing our current position is going to require financial investment to put in place a strategic housing workforce. But that investment, again, will then enable the council to take forward those necessary pieces of work to ensure that our communities are able to access the types of housing that they are going to need. So this was actually just a really quick overview of the plan that I've provided for you today. But what I hope I've been able to show in this short presentation is that this is a very challenging time for us, with a high degree of pressure on the housing system, and we can't actually underestimate the scale of change that is needed here. But whilst we have many challenges, we also do have incredibly dedicated officers who really want to make a real difference to people's lives. So the plan I've put forward today is our framework for action to make sure that our team then are best placed and have the resources they need to support our communities. Thank you.
Thanks, Shelley, for that. Really interesting, and I know we've had a lot of conversations, so I'm really excited about obviously this going forward. Again, gross now, that's my place in my book. Right, okay, so we've got Helen, you've got a question on this?
Yeah, thanks, Shelley. It was really interesting. We know that it's sometimes impossible to do disabled adaptations on properties because it's just not, suitable or what have you. Would you look at a model where maybe the council bought that house off somebody and then rehomed them in a social housing? That would increase our stock then?
We can look, there's a number of things that we need to look at. I mean, that's not something that I've looked at the moment, but that sounds interesting. So I could pick that up offline with you and we can look at whether that is something that might be feasible.
Anyone else got any questions? Oliver Davis.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the empty homes being brought back into use, a number of meetings back, we were informed where we bought back, I believe, 12 houses out of 15 from a landlord who was giving up his houses. Is there any update? Have we gone any further forward by buying more properties?
It was 5. We ended up buying 5 from the landlord, but there was more properties bought from that landlord. A number of RSLs and the council came together to purchase those properties. But that is something that this plan mentions and something that we want to build on because there's real opportunities there, isn't there? So we're doing a piece of work with our colleagues in environmental health to start to map out and look at where some of these empty properties are. There's certain funding streams available through Welsh Government to try and eradicate homelessness. So that is one of our work streams that we are looking at, and we're wanting to progress that.
Okay, thank you.
I think I've got a question. Do you know, obviously, any of our land as well? Do you ever, obviously, we always speak about the social landlords. Do we have any relationships with, obviously, private, developers? That's the word. Such as Red Row and people like that as well.
So that's some of the work that we're looking at taking forward as well at this moment. I don't have the relationships with the private developers as I do with the RSLs, but there's a couple of things that we can be looking at. There's something called Section 106 monies, where when developers develop, they need to do certain things to give back to the communities, don't they? So actually, funnily enough, we had a meeting today with planning to look at how we can be linked in more to the planning process when big developers come and want to do these big developments, to look at how we can then maybe increase the level of affordable housing when those proposals are put forward to planning committee. So we are going to be progressing that. We also are looking at things like private landlord forums. The Environment Department run those, so we're going to be linking into there to be able to help stimulate the market better and try and give these developers more information so that they are more aligned to what we need, so they have that information available to them when they're putting their plans together.
Okay, great. Thanks, Shelley. The recommendation is listed on page 95.
Chair,
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, with your permission, am I able to
Yeah, of
make
course you
just a
can.
couple of brief remarks, and with the permission to do it under the scrutiny section rather than waiting for cabinet? And I'd like you to repeat your thanks to Shelley for the presentation, and also to thank scrutiny members for your attention to the report and for the questions. And this is the first housing and homelessness strategic plan of its kind for Neath Talbot, and it comes at a time of intense and probably unprecedented pressures. And we know that not from data or reports, from the contacts and the calls that we have ourselves as members from our constituents and families in our area. And I think we obviously appreciate the very hard work of our housing teams and the way in which the new housing department is coming together in a very committed way. Now, this crisis really presents a number of key challenges, not just for our officers and staff, but for us as elected, as we've heard from Shelley, but for us as elected members across the county borough, and also for our partners in the housing associations, the RSLs. Similar to Angela's report on adult social care, developing the housing plan will require a whole council approach. And this new strategy will give us the framework that's needed to address these challenges. And I hope that following the questions that you've asked this afternoon and the discussion and your discussions, you'll be able to endorse the strategy for further consultation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So going back to the papers now, thank you for that, Alan. The recommendation is listed on page 95 of the Cabinet Board Agenda Pack. I will propose, can I have a seconder, please?
I'll second.
Members, please indicate if they wish to abstain.
I can see no abstentions, Chair.
Members, if you do not indicate to the contrary, then I will take it that this decision is supported to Cabinet.
I can see no indications to the contrary, Chair, so the decision is supported Cabinet.
I will go straight on to item agenda 9, and again, this report is for decision. Officers, would you like to add anything?
Is it me now?
Yeah, it's you, Kerry. Come on, coming in.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kerry Warren, Head of Children's Services, and I have Victoria Smith, Strategic Lead for Care Experienced Children, and Chris Ray Davis, Strategic Lead for Safeguarding, with me today. I've heard two very good presentations, and you'll see as we go on that obviously some of those areas overlap in our Children and Young People Services Strategic Plan for 2023 to 2026. So perhaps if we start, and Vic is also on the clicker, so Vic will move things on. So if we go on to the national context. There's a short pause. Do you know what? This worked like a dream in rehearsal. Yay. Okay, so the national context, and as you can see, there is a shortage of carers, and you've heard that in others' presentations this afternoon. We have a shortage of foster
Sorry,
care.
Kerr, can I just stop there a minute? Victoria, are you able to actually put that on full screen for us, please? On the bottom on the right. Looks like a projector. That's obviously not me telling you that, mind. That's
Is that coming on now?
No,
Full
it's
screen?
Go to the bottom of the screen, and next to the Zoom button, there's go to your right. If you click on there, and it'll take you to a presentation mode. Not on the Zoom, no, to the left. Yeah, that one. And it should take you to a presentation screen then.
Ah,
there we are.
Fabulous. Okay, so I've started with the national context, and as I was saying, there is a a shortage of carers across the country. There's not enough foster carers, so there's been a rise in demand for the need for foster care. There aren't enough foster carers, there aren't enough residential placements, there aren't enough, sadly, secure placements for our most complex young people. You've heard some things today about the cost of living crisis, and obviously that is biting with children and families. Hearing this week about that not being paid school dinners during the summer holidays will increase the crisis for our children and family living within Neath Talbot. And in my own sort of 35 years, I've not seen anything like the scale of the challenges that we've got facing us across the country. I won't go through all of the things that we've raised, but looking at the post-pandemic impact must be mentioned. It was really challenging, as you all know, for Children's Services, as with the other directorates across the pandemic for 2 years. And we saw a huge increase in the rise of demand for services, a rise in demand of referrals coming into the service, families that would never have come to our attention previously. Some members of staff that work with us, really feeling the pressure financially. And we are seeing things starting to slow down, but it's become the new normal. So whereas we were saying, is this a bulge in sort of the level of services needed? Well, it's remained high. So even though it's started to plateau, it's hugely greater than it was over the last previous few years. If we can go into the next slide, please. So I've put something up there that looks at the local context in terms of how many children there are in Neath Talbot. And if you look underneath, I think what's interesting about that slide is the number of children that we support on a voluntary basis that are in need of care and support. So these are the children that we support voluntarily with families. And that shows the relationship that the workforce have developed with families over the last few years, to show that they trust us enough to have that genuine collaboration and work with us. So we are just short of 700 young people that we support on a voluntary basis. Back in 2012, those numbers were higher. At the highest, it reached about 1,200 and then sort of stayed at around 1,000. But we've pre-pandemic, we were down to about 500 children, and that's gone up by about 200 children, sort of during and post-pandemic. You'll see that we have a number, and I've spoken to members about this now in Scrutiny on a number of occasions, number of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children that we're supporting. We have children in residential care, and again, those numbers doubled during the pandemic. And I'm delighted to report that we've seen a slight increase in the number of children in residential care. They still are far higher than they were pre-pandemic. We work hard to bring children back into Neath Talbot that are looked after, our care experienced children. So you'll see the number of independent foster placements there that has reduced. So even though those children need to be in foster care, obviously their outcomes are far better the closer they live to. The number of children that we've got in mainstream foster placements, are quietly reducing. Vic's bound to correct me, but I think there's 235, children in foster care today. And again, that's that strategy around only those children who need to be looked after will be looked after. Given the multi-agency working that continues to go on, we have a strong partnership within Neath Talbot with our key stakeholders, and you'll see that reflected in the reduced numbers of children that need to be subject to a written child protection plan. But again, that's also because we support a number of young people that are at risk of sexual exploitation and at risk of criminal exploitation separately, recognising that the child protection register and the way that is set up isn't best placed perhaps to protect and support those older teenagers in those circumstances where there's harm outside of the family home. Next slide, please. So our approach is now very well embedded. It's important that children's services have an identity, and we have a well embedded outcome focused practice, which is a strength-based model based on, as we say there, collaborative conversations, in keeping children and families at the heart of everything we do. And we've gone further this year, and we'll go further over the next 3 years in how we develop all of that, and go even further to bring families to the table, and include their voice and their ideas, and help shape our service going forward. And particularly delighted with regards to the family, the parent advocacy network that we have, where families come together and meet with us and talk to us about our service and how we can improve things going forward, but also help shape that service in terms of their own presentations, and helping other families who are in similar circumstances. Equally, with regards to engagement and participation, we have such a strong team, a small but strong team of workers and manager who engage with children and families across the whole of Neath Talbot, and pleased that we've embedded a system where they play a genuine part in shaping our service. So from manager, team manager up to and including head of service, they sit on a panel and play their part in deciding who those managers who will be recruited and work for Neath Talbot into the future. And that's been a delight to see. Again, we've got consultant social workers, senior social workers who understand good practice and the need for families to be supported, especially during these challenging times. They drive that practice forward. They work alongside less experienced workers and help shape that practice using research and creating that learning environment for Neath Talbot that we are very proud of. And again, that's all about standards of practice. So a very well embedded quality assurance framework headed up by Chris Frey, which I think is something that other local authorities are very envious of. Next slide, please. So the key challenges facing us as a children's service, and we've tried to bring those together succinctly under sort of placement sufficiency. The workforce and how you recruit good staff and hold on to good staff that have developed, and had experience with us over the years, and that demand and complexity of need. Next slide, please. So in terms of placement sufficiency, you've heard both previous heads of service talk about that sort of rise in demand and doing things differently, which is incredibly important in terms of this strategy. So we've looked at our fostering service and how we retain carers, recognising that they are an aging sort of group of people who have given their all to the service, but a large number are retiring and leaving over the next few years. And we've recognised that even though our overall numbers of mainstream, overall numbers of looked after children have reduced in mainstream care, what we've seen is, as I've said earlier, a rise in demand for that specialist residential sort of service. We've heard others talk this afternoon about the average cost perhaps of some of those placements, and I can tell you that perhaps typically you're going to be paying around £5,000 a week for a very standard residential provision, and that can go up to anything around £15,000 or £20,000 per week for something that may be presented as more specialist, but is pretty standard really in terms of offering a place to a young person. But the demand is so great that the costs across the country are just spiralling. So we recognise the need to develop something differently, to develop something that meets the needs of those more complex young people who need a specialist service, and having the right carers to be able to be that resilient to meet their needs. I won't go through the whole list, but it's incredibly important for us around accommodation and support needs of our care leavers, and the head of service for housing has talked about that in some detail, and we are working closely together to develop those joined up services, recognising as a directorate how important it is to get it right for young people within Neath Talbot with accommodation needs. You've heard the head of service for adults talk about our transition policy, and again that comes down to a genuine collaboration with adult services and our partners. We've recognised that we can't do this on our own, but joining up together, I think we're starting to see some really good outcomes for those youngsters transitioning from children's into adult social care. But absolutely, that comes at a cost, and it is an expensive. It can be quite expensive in terms of the cost of some of those placements. And our in-house therapy service, and I must mention this because again, this is something that not all local authorities, in fact few local authorities have, in that we've managed to develop a service that has a psychologist and sort of family therapy style approach to services, so that we don't need to be going outside of our own service and commissioning those very expensive resources, but we're able to provide that wraparound support and service to our most vulnerable young people in-house. Next slide, please. The workforce. You know, the workforce is our most valuable resource. You know, I've been proud to help support new social workers coming in. I'll go back a step further than that. So support workers that have come in and been pleased with the way in which we are looking after and supporting children within Neath Talbot, and wanting to develop further and gone on to train and become qualified social workers, and then seen those social workers go up through the ranks to become deputy managers, consultant social workers, team managers, and on to principal officers, 2 of which are on the call today. And I think that's what gives me the most job satisfaction, to be honest, seeing those officers, you know, and how well they you know, how well they've done within Neath Talbot and continue to develop. We talk about valuing staff, and it's important that we show that every day in social care. We have real challenges when it comes to recruiting good staff and then retaining those staff, and our ideas about how we continue to attract staff into Neath Talbot and want them to stay. And part of the way in which we do that is sort of linking with universities, becoming that learning sort of organisation, having that interest in research and encouraging that development, which is led by, as I say, the consultant social workers, and for that to permeate right the way through the service. Succession planning is absolutely critical, and in the strategy you'll see me talk about an accredited sort of programme of development, so that workers, managers, senior officers feel a part of that service, and that they will be able to continue to develop in Neath Talbot without the need or the feeling of wanting to go elsewhere for that development. And well-being, you know, we've had an absolute bashing during the pandemic, and the staff have done, you know, so well in pulling together, and the managers and officers have done well in recognising the need to prioritise the well-being of staff. And I think that's always happened on an informal basis, but now we're seeing the whole council come together to recognise the importance of well-being. And I think, to be honest, Neath and Talbot are doing incredibly well in terms of keeping that a priority for its workforce. Next slide, please. That's right. The demand and complexity. So I've talked about, the rise in demand, and we've seen that from the front door. I can see Sorel is on the call today, and we've talked, a lot about the rise in demand of referrals coming into the front door. I think just last month it's increased again, and it's unprecedented now in terms of the number of families, ordinary families, who need social services support and need children's services support. And as I said earlier, these would be families that would never have come to our attention before. But I think it's down to the relationships that have been built up over time with staff that families will come back into the service. They trust us. There's a stigma attached often to working with social workers and social services, but we've managed to work through that with a large number of hard to reach families, and they will come back and ask for help when their situation changes or things become particularly difficult for them. And that's reflected sometimes in the re-referral rate. Early offers of help, so the strategy very much is, being front loaded, getting involved early enough so that we're able to respond, not just react to situations at the right time. Targeted services, having those specialist services in-house to respond to more complex situations. Strengthening the support of pupils who are on reduced timetables. Now, this is something that has become more acute following and during the pandemic. So you will have heard officers talk about, the number of children who are obviously not in school during the pandemic and the difficulties they've had on returning to school. And we're working closely with education to help reduce those numbers. They are incredibly high, and it comes at a cost to children's services because we put the support plans around those youngsters that are not in school or on reduced timetables, and some of those young people are care experienced children. Another one I want to raise today, because it's important and it sounds very simple, is making documents accessible and written in plain language. We are notorious, as a profession for jargon, and I was pleased to see some of the paperwork we've put in with the strategic plan today in terms of, speak in a very straightforward way so that everybody understands what's going on and the families play their part in that. There's very little point in us writing out to families and completing plans and assessments if no one can understand them. And a review of our short break service. Now, again, this is something that was under huge demand during COVID and since COVID. And we're about to undertake a review of that service to improve the quality and the number of youngsters that would be able to access that resource. Next slide, please. So we are in need of investment in order to meet the current level of demand, but also to improve the quality of our service. And we've concentrated on a few areas where I've mentioned the need really to have a more specialist service, a higher tier, a tier 4 service for carers that would be trained and supervised and supported and paid to look after those youngsters that we really struggle to place, which tend to be older youngsters, and for them to have access to that wraparound in-house therapeutic service. So the beauty of that is that, yes, it will come at a cost, but it'll come at a cost if only if those carers are identified and at the point where we've got youngsters staying with them. The benefit of this is that these youngsters would come from residential placement. So they would be the youngsters that are currently in residential care. So you would see an immediate saving there with regards to the huge costs, you know, that we are currently paying for some of those youngsters in residential care. We're also looking to increase our provision for semi-independent sort of care leavers, and this is recognising that youngsters who have been able to stay, they have been able to stay in foster care post 18, but they've reached an age where they want to be independent, but they recognise that they need a bit of help with that. And I think there's a real opportunity there to move a number of those young people out of their foster homes post 18 into the right sort of semi-independent supported environment. Capital funding has been sourced, and I've been pleased with the way we've collaborated with the Head Service for Housing in order to help us with some of that. And I think that's an exciting project that will make a big difference to us going forward. Thirdly, we are looking for capital funding for a very small transitional children's care home. And this isn't, this would be something that again would be therapeutic, very small in nature, local to Neath and Talbot, and again would be a step down from residential care. So it would be cost neutral, but it would mean that some of those youngsters that are in far-flung places across the country would be back within their own community, which makes it easier for us to support them and for them to see their families and spend time with their families. And again, that's something that we're excited about getting off the ground. There is it's referred to in this document as a market supplement, and again, in terms of the holding on to the qualified workforce of the social work staff and managers, we've had, and I'd be very grateful for the support of the whole council in supporting this, which has meant that we have retained experience within the service. And I think to move away from that position would cause us huge difficulty and prove to be much more costly in the long run in terms of bringing in agency staff, which would be more expensive and also wouldn't be of the quality of the staff that we have within Neath. I talk specifically then about supporting our front door and making sure that they have the workers there and support there, that they hold back the tide for the rest of the service. And it's really important that we're able to support them in increasing the current staffing levels within the front door, given the incredible rise in demand. I'll stop there and take some breath and be happy to answer any questions.
I think you'll be pleased that there wasn't any questions on this, and there's no hands raised now, but I've just got one for you. You just, on the last slide, and it just caught my eye, it did. Obviously, you mentioned at the bottom about the reduced timetable and children facing exclusion. There's an issue at the moment I have, or a concern, is if, for instance, we look at children with traits of neurodiverse conditions, maybe in the schools, we've got 3 to 6 weeks waiting time for CAMS for mental health for children, but we're looking at about a 28 months and longer for obviously the NDD pathway. Now, if you look at a child aged 12, 13, waiting on the list there and having then obviously issues in school, we can see that there's clearly a problem with the figures of exclusions, permanent exclusions and everything on our data. Is anything actually being done between obviously yourselves and education in obviously those waiting lists, or looking at maybe alternative curriculum sort of issues, like solutions or something? Because a child's life, can be really important when the GCSEs. So for the amount of exclusions we have, and it could obviously be part of a condition that obviously our waiting list, and it's not our waiting, it's NHS, it's an issue across Wales. But if there's not something done sooner rather than later, there's even more children's lives are basically affected in a negative way going forward into adulthood. And obviously they then come as coming into our services more so and needing them. So, is there anything in addition or is being looked at to help this area there?
Thank you for that, Chair. And before I bring our strategic lead in for care experienced children, who I know has been working with education, I would just echo your concerns, really. So I see it as RI for Hillside. And I can tell you now, at any point in time, when we look at the young people's profile in Hillside, they will have additional needs and they will be on one waiting list or another. And that's across the whole of the United Kingdom. And they will have been left for inordinate periods of time without any assessment. And that is for the majority of the young people. I've gone back years now in looking at some of those profiles, and it's a feature. It's a feature in those youngsters' histories. I'll bring in Victoria Smith.
Good afternoon. Yeah, there's an ongoing meeting that's just sort of commenced, really looking at pastoral support plans and support specifically targeted for children and young people in this area. So it's a meeting that is led by education, but myself and Ruth Griffiths, who's the lead for family support services, we both attend that meeting. So I guess we're looking at it from the whole continuum, really, from your family support services through to your children who access our children with disability team and our care experienced children and young people, because we recognise, I guess, across the council that this is an issue and it's increased. And very often we have children and young people who might be excluded or on reduced timetables who are also looked after by us, and the pressure that puts on placements, etc. So, we've got to look at how that support plan comes together, to look at how we can support those young people to stay at home with their families. Or to stop placements breaking down, because there are particular difficulties. And I'm aware that through the work, through the group that our NDD leads on, the waiting lists are increasing, aren't they? So there's pieces of work going on in relation to that area, which I know you're aware of, Councillor Goldsworthy. We've had a number of conversations about, but I think there's a lot of development work in that area still to go.
Great, thank you, Victoria. I thought it was me. Andrea?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wonder whether I could just summarise at this point, or are there more questions?
No, there's no more questions. I was just going to actually go to proposing now. So is there anything you want to say now?
Well, it's a summary of the three presentations, really, Chair. Are you happy for me to do that now, or do you want to do that?
Well, if I just finish this first, and then you come in after this, yeah?
Okay.
Is that okay? Right. So as this report is for decisions, do members have any? No, we know that. The recommendation is listed on page 150 of the Cabinet Board Agenda Pack. I will propose. Can I have a seconder, please?
I'll second.
Can members please indicate if they wish to abstain?
I can see no abstentions, Chair.
Members, if you do not indicate to the contrary, then I will take it that this decision is supported to Cabinet.
I can see no indications to the contrary, Chair, so the decision is supported to Cabinet.
Andrew?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So just a summary of what you've heard today then, very briefly. So as I said to committee when we first started, I wanted my heads of service to be absolutely candid about the challenges that they face, and I think they've done that today. They've laid out a lot of the real challenges that they're facing in terms of their ability to staff particular services, alongside an increase of those who need services and the complexity of the people that need services. I put that down to two main things, and we're not different to any local authority across the country. We're better placed, I think, to deal with a lot of these challenges. But I put those challenges down to a COVID legacy, and you've heard that in a number of the presentations today. So when we're talking about recovery and COVID having happened in the past, actually for social services and housing, that's not the case. It's going to be a long road to recovery. So it's not a 1 year, 2 year thing. This is going to be a long legacy that we're dealing with. And you see that, as I said, in increased demand, complexity of services, and our ability to staff the services that we need to staff. Also, I think not helping at the moment is some of the Welsh Government policy, which is very good policy around insourcing, not-for-profit, etc., etc. The new housing laws, which are well placed, but actually need to be properly funded. And at the moment, they're not properly funded. And again, you heard some of that from the presenters today. The next stage of this is that we go away and we'll work out some of the costed plans, business plans that we need to present through to yourselves and to go forward to Cabinet. But of course, we won't be on our own in that, because there are other directorates across the council who will also have their pressures, and we've got to look at all of those pressures in the round. So we can't just look at what's the pressures for social services, what's the pressures for housing. We also have to look at what the pressures in education, in the environment, etc. So we need to do there will be a prioritization of some of this stuff as we go forward. But just to be clear, we've talked today about moving to own our a limited amount of residential care for the elderly. We talked about older people's villages, supported living and extra care. We've talked about creating more resource in our housing function, both strategic and homelessness. And we've talked about offering more incentives for foster carers to care for children and young people with complex needs. There will be a cost attached to that. If we do nothing, then costs will rise. These are statutory services. We can't get around that. So we have to provide these services. So costs will rise in any case, but we will have to make some decisions about how we cost some of these things that we've talked to you about today. As I say, the next stage will be for us to present you with costed business plans, and I look forward to doing that. But I think it demonstrates today, Chair, how forward-thinking our heads of service are, that they're trying to get ahead of the game on some of these things rather than being reactive to things which are up and coming. I'll stop there. I don't know if there are any questions that anyone's got on what I've said, Chair, but I'm happy to take any.
No, I just think I totally agree on what you said about the staff as well. What I've loved going forward, obviously since I've been elected, and I've always sat on this committee, is seeing obviously mainly it's all the same people. So that's a good thing, they're all still here. And the difference of innovative ideas. And again, Andrew, you've got to thank you there as well, because obviously you do get the best out of people too. And you have let them obviously explore new ideas and things like that. So I got to be honest, as chair, one, I'm always proud to say about our social services at the council. Two, I'm always confident that when a report comes to us, it is because everyone is so open and honest. So if we are having tough times, we know we're having tough times, but we do it together. And three, it's a good thing that as a council now going forward, we're all excited, even in crisis times in certain areas of the service. So, I think all of you should give yourself a pat on the back there. So, I give praise where praise is due, and all of you deserve it. So moving on now, I'll have to find out where I am again now. No, I don't. Agenda item 10 is going for KPIs, and I think we've only got one question on this from Helen. Or two we've got.
Yeah, it's the first KPI there, the wellbeing objective. The percentage of re-registrations of children on the Child Protection Register. So how confident are you that children aren't being deregistered too quickly? And for instance, are they, like say, for instance, the school phone up with a concern, even if it doesn't reach the child protection threshold, is it sort of, I'm assuming it's noted and flagged? Can you just explain it to me, please?
Yes, of course. So we've done an awful lot of work on the child protection data. And I'll bring the strategic lead in for safeguarding in a second. But I have oversight of the data, but I'm also I independently look at the data and go in and see and meet with the teams and the social workers, and also meet with partners. So I think that's the bit I want to reassure you about today. So both myself and Chris Ray Davis and some of the other officers have regular meetings, both strategic and operational meetings, to look at the very things that you're asking. I think what we did last time was do a bit of work for you, because I think this came up previously regarding re-registration. Problem we have is the numbers are so low that when it's put in a percentage format, it looks higher. So I think that's what we noticed last time. But there is rigor in that system. So, for example, if a case is re-referred into us and there's been a previous registration, then there's eyes on those cases within 24 hours. There would be eyes on that referral. Decision would be made with the team manager in conjunction with those partners. And I would have every confidence in that process. But I'll bring Chris in a sec to give reassurance around that percentage.
Is that okay? Do you want to come back, Ellen? Oh, Chris.
He was there because I saw him earlier on.
He slipped away a minute.
He's there. He's just trying to connect.
Okay.
May I say, Chair, he will be waiting for that question, and now he's gonna miss his moment.
Oh, we'll give him a minute now.
I would say as well that we could recirculate what we did last time, because it was in relation to the re-referral rate, and I know we did a piece of work on that, and I think we sent it to yourselves, so I can make sure that that's recirculated, and that's something that we look at on a weekly basis.
Yeah, that would be good if you can, Kerry, please.
I could
Melanie Weaver is just put her hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to add, because Chris obviously is having connection problems. Wherever we have a re-refer or a re-registration on the child protection register, then the team manager will review that case and will provide Chris then and myself with an overview of why they've been re-registered. Is it because of the same reasons before? And what we'll even do in some cases then is hold a learning review, where we'll do a timeline, and then we'll look to see some of the interventions that have happened as well. So that each case will be scrutinised on that sort of basis. And I'm sure Chris will come in now and add a little bit more to what I've just said.
We were waiting for you, Chris.
Thanks, apologies.
Not for you to miss your moment. Look, we were waiting.
No, absolutely. No, in terms of re-registration, what we view it as is a really helpful feedback loop. Whilst that indicated the number does indeed appear to be high, the decision, as we've previously shared with Scrutiny, to re-register children is one of a multi-agency decision, and we use the opportunity with all of our re-registrations with our managers and partner agencies to understand why they've come back onto the register, and then feed that kind of learning back into the system. So it's not a number that's ever going away. We will have children that are re-registered, but I'm certainly confident we've got the right mechanisms and systems in place now to monitor and elicit the learning from those cases.
Thanks, Chris. Hold on, just got another question though.
Yeah, thanks. That's really helpful. And yeah, if you could recirculate the thing you did before, Kerry, I think that'd be really helpful. My next question is about safeguarding, page 262. Just looking at it, you've had 1,392 reported allegations of abuse, but then you've only got 271 that you thought were necessary of inquiry. Can you explain that as well? How you make a decision on that? Whether it needs looking into, or whether you can just say, "Oh, there's nothing in it."
Chris, do you want to come in first?
Yeah, no, happy to take that. So our referral form, as you will be aware, is set up to receive referrals for early intervention prevention right through to safeguarding. Whilst partners may flag concerns or relatives as safeguarding concerns, significant checks are undertaken then when received. So in the first instance, the first 24 hours, inquiries are undertaken with other professionals, families, those that are seen as significant others, to understand the information that is presented and build that bigger picture. And then it's on the back of those inquiries then that result in the number you've quoted that move into the inquiries, be they Section 47 for children or the Section 126 inquiries for adults, where we feel it merits more interrogation and work to understand the information presented. Of those that don't come into safeguarding, that doesn't mean they don't go anywhere. Many will go early intervention prevention, many will go team around the family or care and support. So there are lots of other strands of work that are done on the back of the referrals. So whilst not safeguarding, it shouldn't be read as no work is done at all with those families or individuals.
Thanks, Chris. Can you give an example of what wouldn't go to safeguarding? And
I think a nice example then is we may get a referral from a school whereby a child has alleged they've been hit. Some early inquiries then with the child, a conversation with the child to unpick that and get some context, then results in the child saying they were indeed hit, but was playing with the parent out the back. So it would have been escalated to us as a child protection concern, but some further unpicking and establishing context then results in that stepping out of course, that very concerning picture into a more understandable picture. And then when further inquiries are undertaken then with family members and others present, of course, concerns are allayed. So what was referred in as a safeguarding concern is no longer following some very basic inquiries.
Yeah, it's a good example.
That's just one that comes to mind. That there's many others. That,
yeah, that's a good one actually. Yeah. Thanks for that. So there's no further questions now, and that's obviously item 10 is for noting. So back to the scrutiny agenda now. So it's agenda item 5. That is all the items we have chosen now to scrutinise on our scrutiny agenda in public. This item is for noting unless members have anything else to raise, which obviously they haven't. Agenda item 6, urgent items, we have none. Agenda item 7, access to meetings. We will now need to consider the private items included on the Cabinet Board agenda. As you can see on the agenda, the private paragraph is there for everyone to read. Can I please have a proposer and a seconder to move into private? Can I please ask that any public or press in attendance now exit the meeting, and can the recording be stopped? I will propose.
I second, Chair.
Right. Did someone else say something then? No? Okay. So
I can confirm, Chair, the recording has been stopped.